Good morning. Welcome to the Community of the Wild Goose. We are going to be sure to encourage any of those who aren't here that this is I don't like series and part twos and that kind of thing, because then when you come in and it's your first time, or you've missed a few times, and then you're on part two and you're like, I didn't see part one. I hate starting on the beginning things, but you know what? I repeat myself so much, it shouldn't make too much of a difference. But all of the messages, Brad is recording and putting it on YouTube and then up on the Community of the Wild Goose page. So I think it's mine. I think we're going to flip the order though, right? John?
I will try for the second.
Try that. Yeah, might have to delete and then do it again.
Yeah.
But so we're on the second part of Faith, Goodness, Knowledge in a 70s funk band. And it turned into a series last Sunday once I realized I barely scratched the surface and it was going to take a while for us to go through this. Usually I blow right through it in other settings or at Calvary, but like on retreats and stuff we take time with this kind of thing. To me, this is like absolutely crucial to living out what we believe, living out whether you are an addict or an alcoholic and you're living in recovery. It's how do you live this thing out? Because we get principles and ideas and that aspect of it, but to actually live it out, that's the scary part. That's the difficult part. What happens when we get to the dark night of the soul? What happens in those aspects of what religious people would refer to as temptation, and non-religious people would refer to it as, I don't know. But we all know we come to those moments when things are just really, really hard. And so what we've learned so far in this aspect of it is that we have body, and we have soul, and we have spirit. So it's quiz time. What's the body for?
It's able to transport our personality.
Yeah,
So,
vehicle for your personality. The soul, and that doesn't minimize it. It doesn't minimize it. It makes it sacred just as everything else is sacred in that aspect of it. It just takes us out of the need to see it as something that should be compared to, something that should be about performance. It makes it less about the outer appearance, and it makes it more about the purpose of it and the usage of it. And yeah, okay. So soul. How about soul? Thoughts, feelings, emotions.
Addiction?
Addiction is part of that's more of an act, but I would say it's more in the area of the self, the will, and we see the ego. And the ego aspect of it is the part of us that likes attachments. Our ego likes attachments. Our ego likes stuff. And so that's how we can kind of see the ego as part of that. And remember, I repeat this over and over again. This is a metaphor. All right? So you don't have to get into discussion on whether it's really a tripartite man, a body, soul, and spirit, or wait a minute, I used to think of the soul as something different. You don't have to go there. For this purpose, it's the three different manifestations of how we as human beings function, and we can see how this operates, and it's necessary for us to be able to see this, to be able to see whether I'm being driven by my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, or by spirit, which is reserved for truth, intimacy, wisdom. Wow, you guys are good. I'm so proud of you. Wisdom, that communion with God. And so last week when we were, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about body, soul, and spirit, and then we were going into that faith aspect of it, we talked about this right here, that little window. That I drew it in the wrong spot. That's okay. You know what? I'll just do a box. Creative. All right. Yeah, I did that. So, and which is actually really much more descriptive of that liminal space when we go a direction we've never gone before, and it's like you're going through a deep, dark tunnel. and you're like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I going this direction? I'm used to going another direction. You know, I was used to reacting a certain way to people and to life. I was used to reacting in a certain way. I was used to turning to this part of my life to ease my pain and my discomfort. But I'm not going there, and it seems dark. And God, where are you? See, the child in us thought that if we made the right decision, God was going to comfort us and give us good feelings in that new direction. And you know what? More times than not, it's not really that way. We feel alone, we feel dark. But it's because we are going a direction we've never gone before, and we're beginning to see God in a way that we've never saw God before. We're not seeing him as the cosmic social worker or Santa Claus, that he is actually with us in our despair instead of waiting for us to get out of our despair. That he's sharing in that, and so the deeper experience of God with us goes beyond just feelings, thoughts, and emotion. It goes into the area of intimacy. Because I'm experiencing conflict between thank you, sir. A conflict between what I would like to do versus what I'm feeling called to do. And it just makes it a real difficult moment in that liminal space. But the spiritual practice in that suffering is coming out the other side to where the soul says, thank you. Okay? So in this first tunnel stage, the liminal space, it takes faith. Okay, now here's the other quiz. What is faith? What's my definition of faith? Rather than a lack, it's not a lack of doubt. Oh, I put it on there for you guys. All right, so it's action taken in the face of great fear and doubt. So things will be warring against my soul. Things will be going, because my soul is the creative, passionate, longing part that says, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to go without by going a new direction. That I'm going to be deprived of my safety, deprived of my mechanisms, my coping mechanisms. I'm going to be deprived of, I'm going to have to let go of so much that has taken up so much time in my life. But in reality, what you're letting go of, your soulful nature that thought that was what was important and that was reality. You're letting go of that idea that my experience right now is defining me. It's the difference between having a decent earthly father and having a heavenly father. And understanding the difference. Being raised by an earthly father, no matter how good, it's still a human father raising a human son or daughter. But what a grandfather, I'm a grandfather, so, no, I don't mean it in that way. I mean that great fatherly aspect, father of us all, isn't standing in the crowd when you are running with the football, getting ready to score, and you fumble the ball on the 2-yard line. You know what? There's just video out there about a player that happened to. He got cocky. This happened several times. And you know what? Include the music we hear in the background. It's actually very soothing if you include it. If you feel it, if it bothers you, then it'll never. That's part of the meditative process, is including what's out there in here. It's all part of it, okay? And if I start to elevate off the ground, so that those pictures, those videos of that guy dropping the ball before he gets in the end zone, and they're going to put that on, air it over and over and over, and relive the mistakes and that torture, and we all laugh, and we're all like, we're horrified by him doing that, and yet every one of us knows that one of our biggest feelings about it is, I'm glad that's not me. But look at him. Oh my gosh. Right? Even if it's an opposing team, we're kind of glad it's happening. And that aspect, looking at that aspect of it, and that's the kind of image we put on God. That God is watching us, waiting for us to fumble it at the 2-yard line. That he is up in the stands like that rule-making, rigid, we don't quit anything, son, suck it up Father that's waiting for us to get it together, and that's the image we put on God. When in reality, he is with us on the ground at the 2-yard line saying, that sucks, doesn't it? Yeah, can you please rewind about 20 seconds before the ball came out of my hands? God, if you're a loving God, you're going to care so much about my feelings right now that you're going to do a miracle and make it all go away. Would you tell them all to shut up? Would you call the radio stations and the TV programs and say, don't air this, I love my son? And nothing happens. Nothing happens. Why? Because he's too busy being with you on the ground, sharing in your sufferings. That's the God who is not distant and absent and idly by. He is transcendent and immanent and sharing in our sufferings and saying, I believe in you. I believe in you. Yeah, but God, I don't believe in me. Well, it's a good thing it's not about me believing in God anymore. It's understanding that God believes in me. There's a theological change. We were told that we had to believe. And if you don't believe, then it's not real. Well, I don't believe 24/7. I believe at 7, but I might doubt at 10. I might ignore at 12. And I might be a hell of my own making at 10 at night. But thank God I don't serve a God who's waiting for me to have no doubt about what I believe, but a God who says, I believe in you, son. I believe in you, my daughter. That is the paradoxical life that God is with me in my deepest, darkest moments, and that's what will help me go through that window. And what this is doing, and we're going to talk about this today. So faith is action taken in the face of great fear and doubt, okay? So it's action taken in the face of fear, and that's not fart. That's not good. Yeah, Charlotte thought that was fun. Yeah, laugh at my expense at the 2-yard line. So action and fear and doubt in the face of great fear and doubt. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at what goodness is, and here's the goodness aspect of it. I get excited about this. I'm sorry if I get my jollies out of this, but when I start to see God in these aspects of it and meeting us in our humanity instead of us trying to be religious and making it functional like a new pair of shoes, that's pretty exciting. And you just kind of like want to show them to everybody. Hey, look what I got. Yeah, it's awesome. It is that newness, that freshness of something that had gotten old and worn out. Every time we get the enlightenment of these new aspects of looking at the same thing. So, and even since some of you heard me teach on some of these things before, I still wake up to some aspects of it that excite me. And here's one of them. Okay? So it says we add to our faith goodness in 2 Peter. Add to our faith goodness. Now, immediately it wants to take us back to the good behavior. Immediately it wants to take us to actions and behavior. Don't go there. Let me tell you what this aspect of goodness is according to what Scripture teaches. In the Old Testament, the word goodness in Hebrew is translated as the Spirit agreeing with the soul. That's why it's important for us to see these differences between soul and spirit. It's the Spirit agreeing with the soul in harmony. Think about that for a minute. I want to not want to drink. I want to not want to use. I want to not want to react the way I do. But my soul's been operating for so many years doing the same thing. It's not going to give up control overnight. It's going to want to maintain its way. And it's so subtle sometimes it's not so obvious. That's where justification comes in. Well, I feel this way because they. I feel this way because it. And so it's hard for us to get out of the soulful, hurtful longings that we desire. So when we yield to the Spirit of truth that says, God is for us. Then the deepest desire of our heart to enter into a momentary suffering by not giving myself the pleasures of the soul. And the soul yields to the truth of the Spirit for the first time. That's when they meet. And the soul, in the long run, when you begin to get the benefits of yielding to the Spirit, it's like, thank you. Thank you. I thought the suffering was going to kill me. I didn't realize that was the portal to intimacy and to love and to truth. Okay? We are in our situation purely out of fear that there isn't a divine more if I give myself to the momentary suffering. We're afraid there's nothing more than what I'm experiencing now, so I better grab for all the gusto that I can. Well, that dated me. That was an old commercial. I know a couple of you remember that commercial, right? Grab for all the gusto.
It was a beer commercial.
It was a beer commercial, yes. It was, of all things, grab for all the gusto. So my soul says, do you hear that commercial? I'm being deprived of gusto. How sad. How sad. I could never experience gusto ever again. I don't ask for gluten-free, I ask for gusto-free. Because God is nothing more than a buzzkill. He doesn't want me to be happy. Such a lie that is told in us and about us. And that whole aspect of advertising wanting us to think that everything's about the body and the soul. It's what sells, right? What advertising agency is going to say, actually, you don't need this. You don't need it at all. There's no gusto in it. The foam goes away. There's no gustology about it. Okay? So what we're listening to, that deep part of us inside, and goodness. So goodness in the Old Testament is spirit agrees with the soul. My senses eventually agree with what the Spirit intended and wanted to do in the first place. It begins to meet up. In the New Testament, it is facing the right direction. Goodness is not behavior, it's which direction are you facing. Because we haven't even begun on the journey when we first turned and saw a new way. And we're like, I can't see very far. See, when I look the other way, the familiar way, I can see really far into the future. And it still sometimes doesn't prevent me from doing something in the present. Isn't that true? I know what I'm going to encounter. And my soul says, you might as well just go ahead and do it, because your feelings are really strong. Ease the feelings. The Spirit is saying, no, let me go with you in the suffering of your feelings. There's a divine more. Go that direction you've never gone before. And there is a window, and we all know there is that window of choice. There is that window of choice. And we awkwardly ask for help prior to stepping into any window. And when we do that and we go to that aspect of it, we're so vulnerable and we feel it's like such knuckleheads. Well, guess what? We are. The problem was you were trying to prevent yourself from looking like one. We go there anyway. And we go through this window, and when this happens and the Spirit and the soul begin to agree, then we start to realize that goodness always starts out poorly and awkwardly. Okay? And I heard I'm not big on motivational speakers. I know my voice sounds loud and I try to, I believe in inspiration, but I really don't like motivational speakers. I'm convinced they just want me to buy their books and tapes and give me the illusion that I need them because they made me feel good and gave me a good line. Okay? You don't need them and you don't need me. You need where they got it from, where they got the information from, and we all have access to that. But then we share together, and that's where we need each other in that aspect of it. Okay? But we don't assign the principles of God to some other human being just because they're cool and inspirational, or they made me think that they had power. All right, that was bonus material. All right. But I did hear a motivational speaker one time say, anything worth doing is worth doing well. But he said anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And I thought about that and I was like, how true that is. Anything that is of value and is important, when we start out, we're not going to know what we're doing. It's going to be the first time we ever do something like that, and we're so afraid that we're going to look like we don't know what we're talking about. So many times people will come to me and they come to this community, or they come to Calvary and they come to our group meeting and they're like, you know what, I feel really embarrassed because I don't know anything about the Bible. Were you supposed to? Was that a prerequisite for hanging out with a bunch of knuckleheads? You know, and most of the knuckleheads I work with that are the hardest ones to work with are the ones that do know the Bible. Because they think they're right all the time. And they have to unlearn everything and begin again. So to begin with a clean slate, awesome. You know, and so it's not necessary that you are good at what you do before you start. How many have taken a job somewhere and it felt like it was beyond what they could actually do, and they're afraid, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, you're so nervous. I don't think I know what I'm doing. You know, but I don't want anybody to find out because it's a great job. It's good money and whatever, and I'm afraid to be exposed in that aspect of it. You know what that usually means? It usually means you're perfect for the job because you were chosen, you didn't earn it. They told you, they saw in you the capacity to be able to do what you were hired for. Now do it freely and awkwardly. Ask questions, because if we think we need to know more, we're going to be afraid to tell people we need help. And that goes for everything. So anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And the best way I could describe that is to think about how a little kid learns how to walk. Okay? It's hilarious. It's like watching a little alcoholic walk around the room, okay? So they got those one-piece pajamas on, you know, that they've worn way too long. It only fit them for like 2 days, and all of a sudden they look like a bent banana, you know? And they got tread on their feet so they don't fall. And they're crawling around and crawling around and crawling around, and then they say their parents have friends over, and they're like talking, you know, and they're like, all of a sudden little Johnny's like crawling, and all of a sudden he no offense, John, and then little No Name goes over and starts to pull himself up from the coffee table like this, and they always look to see if you're looking, you know, like that. And they're like this. And then it starts pulling himself up. Then it goes one hand. And they stop talking. They're watching. And then he lets go. You know? Then all of a sudden, there he goes. Takes that one step. The next step, no floor. Boom. Falls on the floor. It's lying there. And what does everybody do? Woohoo! Look at you. And they're like, I'm lying on the floor, all right? I really did a bad job of that. Wouldn't it be horrible if parents, when that happened, would be embarrassed with their friends over? I'm so sorry you had to witness this. We have really raised them in a way that they aren't supposed to do this. Get up, get up, get up. That's quite, you know, come on, anything worth doing is worth doing well. Why don't you just drag yourself around the floor the rest of your life? That would be horrible. But see, when we're little, we actually learn that failure is part of learning and growing and changing, because where you want to end up is more important than what you experience in the moment. Okay? I could repeat that one over and over again. We could leave. Say it again. I don't remember it. What, Jennifer?
So where you end up is more important than where you are at the moment.
Yes. So it becomes part of. And the other side of that is it's more important how God sees us in that moment than it is on how I feel about myself. So God says, as my friend John Lynch says, Christ in me, even on my worst day. He's with me on that 2-yard line. Man, it's nuts. Because see, if I can recognize that in those moments, then I will start to move into a place where I see God with me before those moments, in the good times. Okay, those are the hardest ones for us, really. We don't know it though, because we're just like cruising. We get hit, boom. Okay, so anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, because the beginning of it we are adding to this goodness. So check out. how it's not about behavior. It is about a fruit out of our journey with God. Galatians says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. So in that aspect of it, what I see is that these two combining together, the soul and the spirit in agreement, even if I am suffering, will produce the joy in the fruits of the Spirit and goodness. I will find myself doing well because of the connection that I have in my intimacy with God, even during the difficult times when I go a direction I've never gone before. Ephesians 5:9 says that goodness is the fruit of the light. That there's a song that years ago, and I can't remember who sang it, but there was a song that said, "Hold it up to the light." I think it might have been David Wilcox. Hold it up to the light. When you're not sure what to do, or a decision to make, or should I stay or should I go, or should I let my soul lead and act, take it and hold it out into the light of day and see if it survives. Shine a light on that and expose it for all of the aspects of it. That's letting God into those aspects of it. Because you know what? The cockroaches can't survive in the light. They scatter. And that's like shame. So much of us driven by shame. Shame cannot survive the light. See, Philemon says, goodness out of our willingness instead of out of our duty. Goodness is our soul giving into the deepest desire of my heart in the Spirit. That is my willingness with God's power. My willingness with God's power together is combining that. So we're not going to feel good in the early stages of this process, although our soul deeply wants to give into this. It's just afraid. And no wonder the most often used phrase in the Bible is, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. It's not saying shame on you for being afraid. The soul will always get afraid. But there's that deeper part of you that is wisdom and truth that says, I want to not want to be afraid. The Spirit of truth says, I don't need fear to go away in order for me to go ahead and get on the roller coaster. Okay? The soul says, get out of line quick. And then the Spirit says, get back in line. And then the soul says, get out of line now. That's relapse. That's relapse. Stay in the freaking line. You know, I always say, whether it's a plane trip, with my fear of heights, whether it's a plane trip or it's a roller coaster, can't tell you how many times I've gotten off afterwards and gone, oh my gosh, if I knew I wasn't going to die, I would have enjoyed that ride. Ever felt that?
Yes.
I felt like I missed out on the whole ride because I was afraid. Okay, I'll do it again. This time I won't be afraid. Dang it, I missed it again. Eventually, we learn to enjoy the journey instead of waiting for the destination. And that's experiencing and living that presence of God. Okay? So then we're going to add to our goodness, in 2 Peter, knowledge. And what is knowledge? Knowledge is the little kid learning how to walk, who gets a little cocky about his steps, and then trips and falls, boom, coffee table. You know? Knowledge is realizing, okay, only do this in wide open spaces. That's what we learn from failure. That's what we learn, is knowledge. Okay? And the reason for that, the reason why they go together, knowledge alone is of no value whatsoever. Have you ever had a preacher, and it might be me, have you ever had a preacher or a teacher or somebody in life who's speaking a lot on topics that they claim to be an expert on, and you get this bad feeling like they don't know what they're talking about? Even though they're saying some things that are true, they don't know what they're talking about, is because they can't match the experience with their words. You see really young pastors come up the ranks, and maybe they have a gift, I don't know, but a lot of times their father was a pastor and their father's father was a pastor, and they saw it a good occupation, and they're going to defend the gospel and do it this way, and you have this 21-year-old kid telling you what it's like to go through retirement. You know? And that you should trust God. Trust God. What do you know? Because in the knowledge aspect of it, and we hear we love, like I said in here before, Jennifer sent me a quote right after I spoke on the quotes, people quoting quotes all the time. I do it all the time, don't get me wrong. But I think sometimes people just quote other people's quotes because it felt good at the moment. The soul felt good, but they don't practice it at all. They just think it's a good Facebook page. And they'll gather a lot of attention out of what somebody else learned. Isn't that cool? Yeah. And that's it. Because concepts do not lead to experience. Concepts don't lead to experience. But experience can lead to concepts. So why shouldn't we go through what we're going through? Why shouldn't we be suffering through the practice of what it is we're learning? Because if we don't have the experience and the concepts, then we will not have the other thing, which is understanding. Yes?
I remember early,
Are your ears cold?
No.
It was warm in here before, now I feel like...
Now it's cold.
I remember early in sobriety, my
My
dad
coffee.
would send me texts of easy does it and take it one day at a time. And I remember specifically texting him back, stop texting me those quotes, they mean nothing to me. And over the past few years, when I've had an experience that the quote actually means something, it speaks to exactly that. But I remember being very bitter at those stupid quotes that didn't mean anything to me because I had no experience to attach them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that says it right there. I mean, how many times do we actually experience that? I have such great appreciation for the pastor I had when I was a kid. Mike, I got religious on him, and I decided he was a watered down, non-Bible preaching Presbyterian minister. God bless him, he was so patient with me. I thought I knew it all and whatever, and he was so patient with me. And it wasn't until later as an adult when I look back at things he used to do and say that I appreciated so much. You know, how loving and inclusive he was, even to show me grace when I wasn't showing him grace as a young man. And, you know, but it takes brokenness, you know? And not that we have to go through divorce, or we have to be an addict, or we have to be an alcoholic, or we have to, you know, it's not that. It's just that in some way, whether it be by our willingness or by our life experiences, we must be broken. We must be broken. Because the brokenness that we experience is actually the brokenness of the protective shell on the seed that contains everything that we actually are. We're trying to protect the outside shell, our image. We're trying to protect our ideology. You see that in today's politics. Okay, we want to protect ourselves in our place, our rightness, our theology, and then all it takes is failure. You know, you see it in high-profile people, especially ones that make big causes their big thing, right? And they will be anti this or for this, and then all of a sudden you see the headline: so and so fell from grace, because they don't say it that way, but you know they had a fall from their own life. They were arrested on a particular thing. You know, they protested too much about the very thing they hated about themselves. You know, and so that self-protection. And so that outer shell has to be broken in order for its, Watchman Nee calls it the release of the Spirit. So when all of my ways of doing things and my ideas and my theology and my whatever come to the end of myself, and I find myself broken, and I get to a place where I say I can't, and I think it's the end of this world as I know it, then I feel fine. You heard that song, right? That was good. I did that. I just totally. So, wish I were smooth enough to just not call attention to what I just did. But anyway, That's the release of the Spirit. It is the end of the world. Jesus was saying these are the end times. They're your end times and my end times. If I am willing to allow the end to the way I used to do things. And that's where resurrection is. Okay? The definition of resurrection is coming out the other side. Coming out the other side. Look at that right here. And then that unified experience of body, soul, and spirit. Now my body can be the recipient of what my desire and my spirit say. I am led now by what God says about me, not by what the world says about me. You know, when we're little and our parents are telling us it's about image. You're getting fat. You might want to, watch what they think of you. My mom used to say, don't be a stumbling block to others. And she was referring to, don't be a bad witness for Jesus. That was also her way of keeping me in line. Until I got older and I allowed a new meaning to what that was saying, because Jesus was talking to the religious people. And he was saying, don't be a stumbling block. In other words, with your ideology and expectations and your religious demands, don't be an obstacle for the broken to come crawling to Jesus. Get out of the way. Quit telling the heroin addict that he needs to stop smoking. I mean, really? Quit causing an obstacle for that person to have the requirements on how they come crawling to God. In the place where they're at, because it's not my journey, it's their journey. But when I allow God to be in me with them, I can be with them along their way. And I'll close with this, and then we'll have just a little bit, 2 or 3 more minutes of dialogue. But I remember when I was working at Bermuda with women with struggling with eating disorders, and you see the families, and it's understandable, the families just struggling with them saying, eat, just eat, not understanding the torture that is being experienced. The torture of the fear and the doubt as they're staring at a plate of food. It doesn't make sense to the person who doesn't struggle with that. To have a dysmorphic image of your body, a distorted image of your body, that when you're actually 70% of your body weight, you still feel fat. Because it got ingrained in your head, and the fear and the doubt there. And I remember this set of parents telling me, how can we get her to eat if she would just eat? And the more they made it about food, the less they made it about their daughter. You see what happens there? What are we supposed to do? We've exhausted everything that we can do. And I was like, can you control whether she dies or not? No. In reality, no. You see the problem? I go, yeah, I get that, but isn't that reality? So what are we supposed to do? Why don't you join with her in this remaining period of her life and say, you know what, we realized we've made this too much about food and not about you. So you're going to do what you're going to do. And you might die. We want to spend the last months with you, making it all about you and not making it about food. That's a gamble, isn't it? That's a big risk. Guess what? She started to recover. She started to recover. Why? Because it stopped being about behavior and it started being about belonging. And people make their choices. They're going to make their choices. But when I'm codependent, when I am trying to prevent them from dying, when I am doing that, I'm not walking alongside it. I'm not a very good person to walk alongside somebody if that's what I'm doing. To not take responsibility for it, or to not be deputized by God, the way I like to put it. To be the morality cop and run the interventions aspect of it. People make their choices. They make their choices. And we can love one another at the same time that we don't get in front of the train. And that's the hard part. But you know what? The beautiful part about it is that when success happens and recovery and restoration happens, who gets the credit? God. God alone. Because it's their will and their spirit It's my will and my spirit. It's God's power and my will. And others can play if they want to. But the bottom line is I'm not dependent upon somebody else in order for me to have a moment with God and say, let's go places we've never gone before. Okay, so last thing here, and I'm going to just touch on this real quickly, and then we'll talk more about it next time. This right here is the loop that most people get caught in. Is this faith, action, goodness, knowledge. Now I'm going. Now things are going. But now I'm going to be confronted with another moment, another difficult day. I am, and I'm not going to sit there. My soul is overworking, trying to protect everything. I'm not going to stop and go, in this moment of darkness, I remember when Henry said a quote that was, we don't do that because the soul is working overtime, right? But in the soul, we can make a choice in that window. And here's where the window is, to insert something. This is where we have an opportunity to insert a practice that maybe we have never gone beyond this aspect. We've circled and had to start all over again. We insert something. Do you know what that would be? What of these things could we put in here to get us to that next place? Faith? Yes. An act of faith. Because we're back at that place where it's my soul longing and hurting. Insert another act of faith. And then this takes it out of the loop. And we break through to go to a place we've never gone before. And this is what we'll talk about next time, is you add to that self-control. And self-control is not what you think. Okay? Our interpretation of self-control is willpower all the time, right? We already know willpower doesn't work on anything. Right? So let's take the image of self-control being willpower out. And what we're really doing is letting the Spirit quiet the desire of the soul. We take this off and we call it soul control. And now we have a 70s funk band. Okay? So we are learning in the Spirit to yield to the Spirit. And that's saying to the soul, your job was to create music, to create romance, to create art, to fall in love, to do all these wonderful things. That's your job, soul. Your job is not to drive the bus, make the decisions in the moment of fear and anxiety, in the moment of want. That's not your job. That's where the Spirit takes over, and you pray prayers like this: God, I'm freaking out, I'm full of fear, and I'm full of doubt. Nevertheless, I will follow you. Because I want to not want to do what I did. I want to not want. So I'm going to feed the whisper, quiet the loud voice of the soul, and now you are practicing the spiritual practices in that moment. And then you receive the benefits that come with it. Not God going, you can receive your benefits. It's not that. He's not United Health or Blue Cross Blue Shield, okay? Because you took care of yourself. It is the natural benefits that come with being in line with God, body, soul, and spirit. You begin to experience the benefits of alertness and awareness. And you start to realize that that's what Paul meant by, I consider my present sufferings nothing in comparison to the joy that awaits me. And that's where we go. Okay, so